At 22,000 feet above Nazi-occupied France, Staff Sergeant Alan Magee had maybe 10 seconds to make an impossible choice. Behind him, his B-17 was breaking apart. Fire was spreading through the fuselage. 7 of his crewmates were already dead or dying. In his hands, he held his parachute. It was on fire. The silk was melting. The lines were fused together. Below him, 4 miles of frozen air and Nazi-occupied France. He could stay in the burning aircraft and die in the explosion. Or he could jump without a parachute and die on impact. He jumped anyway. What happened next would become one of the most impossible survivals in military history. Alan Eugene Magee was born in Plainfield, New Jersey, in 1919, the same year the Treaty of Versailles ended one world war and planted the seeds for another. He grew up in a working-class family during the Depression. Like millions of young American men, he had no idea that world events were about to reshape his entire life. On December 7th, 1941, everything changed. Within weeks of Pearl Harbor, Magee enlisted in the Army Air Forces. He was 22 years old. He wanted to fight. But the Army Air Forces didn't just need pilots. They needed gunners, men willing to sit in freezing, cramped positions for hours, waiting for enemy fighters to attack. Magee was assigned to the most dangerous position on the most iconic bomber of the war, the ball turret of a B-17 Flying Fortress. Let me explain why this mattered. The B-17 had 10 crew members. The pilot and co-pilot sat up front. The navigator and bombardier worked below them. And scattered throughout the aircraft were 6 gunners, each responsible for defending against enemy fighters from a specific angle. The ball turret hung from the belly of the bomber like a glass and metal blister. It was 44 inches in diameter. That's smaller than a bathtub. To fit inside, gunners entered in the fetal position. Their knees were at their chest. Their back was curved against the metal. They couldn't stand. They couldn't stretch. They could barely move. And here's the detail that would change Alan Magee's life forever. You could not wear a parachute inside the ball turret. There was no room. The parachute hung on a hook just inside the aircraft. If the plane was going down, the ball turret gunner had to rotate his turret, climb up into the fuselage, grab his parachute, strap it on, and then jump. In training, they said this process took about 60 seconds. In combat, with the aircraft on fire and filled with smoke, it could take much longer, or it could be impossible. Ball turret gunners had the lowest survival rate of any crew position in the 8th Air Force. They knew this when they volunteered. Alan Magee volunteered anyway. In late 1942, Magee was assigned to the 303rd Bomb Group, based at Molesworth, England. His bomber was a B-17F with an unusual name. Snap, crackle, pop. Yes, like the cereal. Bomber crews named their aircraft everything from the patriotic to the absurd. It helped them cope with the reality of what they were doing. Magee's crew was like hundreds of others, young men from across America, thrown together by war, trained for a few months, and then sent to fly combat missions over the most heavily defended airspace in the world. On January 3rd, 1943, they were briefed for a target that made experienced crews go quiet: Saint-Nazaire. On the French Atlantic coast, the Germans had built something almost indestructible: massive concrete submarine pens that sheltered U-boats between their attacks on Allied shipping. The concrete roofs were 8 feet thick. Bombs barely scratched them. But the 8th Air Force kept sending bombers anyway, hoping to hit submarines outside the pens or destroy support facilities. The Germans knew exactly how important Saint-Nazaire was. They surrounded it with more anti-aircraft guns per square mile than almost any target in Europe. Bomber crews called it Flak City. On previous missions, loss rates had reached 20%. 1 in 5 bombers didn't come home. On the morning of January 3rd, Alan Magee sat in a briefing room and learned where they were going. He climbed into Snap, Crackle, Pop's ball turret, and waited for takeoff. It would be his last mission. The flight across the English Channel was routine. Hundreds of bombers in formation, contrails streaking behind them, the French coast approaching. Then the sky started exploding. Anti-aircraft shells are designed to explode at specific altitudes. They fill the air with shrapnel, jagged metal fragments traveling at thousands of feet per second. From the ground, flak looks like black puffs of smoke. From inside a bomber, it sounds like gravel hitting a tin roof. When a shell explodes close, the entire aircraft shudders. Snap, crackle. Pop started taking hits almost immediately. First one engine, then another. Fire spread from the wing into the fuselage. The electrical system failed. The intercom went dead. And then the fighters arrived. German pilots knew that damaged bombers falling out of formation were easy targets. They circled like sharks, waiting for aircraft to drop their guard. From his ball turret, Magee was still fighting. He could see fighters making passes, tracers streaking through the sky. He kept firing until the aircraft shook with a massive explosion. Something critical had been hit. Snap, crackle, Pop began to fall. Inside the disintegrating aircraft, chaos. Magee rotated his turret and climbed up into the fuselage. Smoke was everywhere. Fire was spreading. Bodies of his crewmates lay motionless. He found his parachute pack, and his heart sank. Shrapnel had torn through it. Fire had melted the silk. The deployment cord was fused to the pack. Even if he jumped, it would never open. He was 22,000 feet in the air, inside a burning aircraft, with no way down. The fire was getting closer. He could feel the heat. In seconds, the fuel tanks could explode. He could stay and burn, or he could jump and fall. Alan Magee jumped. And then there was nothing but wind and cold and sky. 22,000 feet is 4 miles. At that altitude, the air is thin enough to kill you. Temperature drops to 40 below zero. The oxygen concentration is less than half what it is at sea level. A human body in freefall reaches terminal velocity in about 12 seconds, roughly 120 miles per hour. At that speed, falling 22,000 feet takes approximately 3.5 minutes. 3.5 minutes of falling. 3.5 minutes of waiting to die. Except Magee didn't wait. Within the first minute, hypoxia set in. His brain, starved of oxygen, simply shut down. He lost consciousness somewhere above 20,000 feet. He fell unconscious through the clouds over France, completely unaware of what was happening. And this is the first reason he survived. When people know they're about to impact, they tense their muscles. They brace. Ironically, this makes injuries worse. Rigid bodies break. Relaxed bodies absorb impact. Alan Magee was as relaxed as a person can be. Completely unconscious, completely limp, like a rag doll falling 4 miles. Below him, the city of Saint-Nazaire spread out. He was falling toward the German-occupied naval base, toward the U-boat pens they had just tried to bomb. And directly in his path was the Saint-Nazaire train station. The station had a large glass and metal roof over its central platform. 90 feet of iron framework and glass panels. At 120 miles per hour, Alan Magee hit that roof. What happened in the next 3 seconds should have killed him. It didn't. When Magee hit the glass roof, he didn't hit it like a rock hitting a window. Glass is not infinitely rigid. It flexes before it breaks. The first pane of glass bent inward, absorbing energy. Then it shattered, breaking into thousands of pieces that flew outward, absorbing more energy. Then he hit the metal framework, which bent, which absorbed more energy. Then another pane of glass. Same process. 90 feet of glass and metal, breaking and bending in sequence. Each fraction of a second slowed him down. By the time he hit the stone floor of the train station, his velocity had been reduced by an estimated 70%. Still a brutal impact. Still enough to cause catastrophic injuries, but not enough to kill him. German soldiers found him on the station floor, surrounded by shattered glass. He was unconscious, bleeding from 28 separate shrapnel wounds, with a nearly severed arm, a broken ankle, a partially collapsed lung, and kidney damage. He had no parachute. His aircraft was burning in a field miles away. By every logical measure, he should have been dead. He was still breathing. The German doctors who operated on Alan Magee had no idea how he had survived. When they learned he had fallen from 22,000 feet without a parachute, they refused to believe it. They operated for 8 hours to save his right arm. The damage was so severe that amputation seemed inevitable. But Magee, even semi-conscious, refused. Somehow they saved it. Somehow he survived. Magee spent the next 2.5 years as a prisoner of war in Stalag, 17B in Austria. His wounds healed slowly. His arm never fully recovered, but he was alive. In May 1945, Allied forces liberated the camp. Alan Magee went home. For decades, he rarely talked about what happened. The story seemed too impossible. Who would believe a man fell 4 miles without a parachute and walked away? In 1993, 50 years after the fall, Magee returned to Saint-Nazaire. He stood in the train station that had saved his life. The glass roof had been replaced decades earlier, but the structure was the same. The platform where he had landed was the same. He died in 2003 at the age of 84. He had lived 60 years beyond the day he should have died. Alan Magee's survival wasn't a miracle. It was physics, luck, and the unconscious relaxation of a body that didn't know it was dying. He's not the only person to survive a fall without a parachute. There have been others who fell into snow or trees or, like Magee, through glass. What they all have in common is that they hit something that gave way, something that absorbed energy instead of delivering it all at once. But Magee's story is about more than physics. It's about a 23-year-old kid from New Jersey who climbed into the deadliest position on a bomber, flew into the most heavily defended airspace in Europe, and when everything went wrong, when his aircraft was burning, his crew was dying, and his parachute was destroyed, he still jumped. He didn't know he would survive. He just knew that staying meant certain death. Alan Magee fell 22,000 feet without a parachute, and he walked away. If you found this story incredible, you should see what happened when a submarine dove 500 feet past its crush depth, and the crew lived to describe the sounds the hull made as it bent. That video is right here. I'll see you there.